Isis, meanwhile, has gotten wind of all of this, and she has followed Osiris, and she puts herself in as babysitter for the king and queen's little baby. She gets the job, of course. And she is, after all, a goddess, so she decides that she will make the king's son immortal. So she puts him into the fireplace to purge the mortality from him, transforms herself into a swallow, and goes twittering mournfully around the central pillar within which her husband's body is contained. Well, the mother walks in, and there's this incredible scene, and Isis transforms herself out of the swallow form into her human form, and she explains the situation, and the king, out of gratitude for her making their son immortal, says, well, what would you like? She says, by the way, my husband is in that pillar. Can I have that? He says, well, sure. Cut down the palace, and they give her this tree from out of which she retrieves her husband's sarcophagus. So she floats back down the Mediterranean to the Delta Valley of the Nile with her husband, and while she is there, she conceives from the dead body of her husband their son Horus. And here is Isis right here in the form of a hawk conceiving from the dead body of Horus, or the dead body of her husband Osiris, and Horus is born from that. And this image here of Isis nursing her infant Horus is actually the prototype for the Madonna nursing Christ. It came out of this image. And Set one day is out hunting a boar, and the boar has gone right to this scene where she's nursing the infant, there's Osiris. And Set is furious, and he goes and he rips Osiris into 15 pieces and scatters the pieces. Isis and her sister and Anubis go around finding all the pieces, and they find all of them except one, the phallus, which has been swallowed by a fish. And they stitch the body together, and here is Anubis presiding over the embalming of Osiris. They stitch it together, and Horus decides to go out to avenge his father's murder. So this is the Hamlet motif. He goes out, and his father's murderer is his uncle, and he goes out and fights Set. And in the combat, Set loses a testicle, and Horus loses an eye. But he recovers the eye. This is the eye of Horus that you see in Egyptian iconography. Should have had an illustration for it. And when he brings it back to Osiris and shines it upon him, his father is resurrected. And so Osiris becomes, from this point on, the lord of the immortal lord of the underworld. This is why he lost his phallus. He is no longer in time. He has gone down out of the vegetation world into the realm of eternity. Now, in the Egyptian afterlife, this is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this is where the Day of Judgment in the Christian apocalypse comes from. When someone dies, they are identified with Osiris. And this is the person being led in, Osiris Jones, let's say. He's led into the scales, and this is the primordial weighing of the heart. The person's heart is put on one side of the scales, and it is weighed against the feather of truth, the goddess Ma'at. And if the heart is heavier than the feather, this will indicate that the person has lived a primarily materialistic life. And this monster here, called the swallower, is waiting to swallow up the heart, if that is the case, and there will be no rebirth. If, however, the feather is heavier, or is heavier than the heart, then the person will be guided in to the throne of Osiris. And here is the Pope recording the results, and here is the initiate being guided in by Horus. Here's the eye of Horus. Here is Isis and Nephthys, who are behind the throne. And here are the four sons of Horus. They represent the four quarters of time and space out of the lotus, with the abyss underneath it. And the person is either resurrected and given immortal life or is reincarnated in time. So that is the Egyptian vision of the creation of the universe, as well as the Egyptian idea of the Day of Judgment. Now notice in this vision that everything is organically alive. In the initial vision, when the god rises up out of the water, contrast that with the first page of the book of Genesis, where the spirit is hovering above the water and is separate from it. In the Egyptian vision, the spirit is in nature. It rises up out of nature. Spirit is the bouquet of nature. nature intends the spirit. It is not to be supernaturally opposed from up there. And so there is a wonderful, lush, vegetal animism that animates the entire Egyptian worldview. And it's similar in that respect with the whole Hindu vision of the cosmos, and quite different from the next creation myth that we'll move into here, which lies behind the book of Genesis. And this is the Babylonian creation myth. Now, the Babylonian creation myth is the source of the oldest dragon slayer myth that we know of that's been written down and recorded. Barely fits on there. Now, the Babylonians originated out of the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, but the culture that was there before them were the Sumerians. The Sumerians were not Semites, but the Babylonians were. And the last dynasty of the Sumerians was the famous Third Dynasty of Ur, which dates from about 1950 to 2050 BC, or 2050 to 1950 BC. And then the Babylonians came and conquered the whole thing and absorbed most of the Sumerian mythology, but they subordinated it to their own patriarchal warrior myth. And the Babylonian myth originates from about 1700 BC, and it goes something like this. In the beginning, there is a primordial, undifferentiated chaos that is personified by three beings. Tiamat, who is personified as a kind of dragon being. She is the watery abyss. She is the goddess, or the female personification of salt water. Her consort Apsu is the male personification of fresh water, and their son Mumu is the personification of moisture and clouds. From out of this, they generate Lamu and Leamu, who are the female and male personification of silt. This is the riverine mythos. The Babylonian mythos, like the Egyptian mythos, emerges out of the riverine world, and the cosmologies bear the stamp of that geographical locale. And Lamu and Leamu mate, and they give birth to Anshar and Kishar, who are the male and female personification of the horizon of the earth, Kishar, and the horizon of the heavens, Anshar. And this is an echo from an earlier Sumerian myth, where fundamentally there was Anki, the male god, lying on top of the female god, Ki, and Enlil, the god of the air, came in and separated them. And that's like the Egyptian motif with Shu separating Jeb. Anshar and Kishar then give rise to Anu, the god of the heavens, who comes down and, as it were, gives birth spontaneously to Ea, who is also known as Enki. And Enki is the lord of the watery abyss. He's the central figure here because he gives birth with his spouse to Marduk, who is the star of this particular myth, the solar warrior god, Marduk. Now, the story goes that the generations of gods that have come into being after the original trinity of Tiamat, Apsu, and Mumu are carrying on wildly. They're fighting. They're making all this noise. And the original trinity just want to go back to sleep. So Mumu and his father Apsu begin plotting how they can do away with these other gods. They want to murder them off. Tiamat will have nothing to do with it. So they plan in secret how they're going to go out and kill the other gods. And Ea gets wind of this. And he comes in as a rain cloud while Apsu is asleep and rains on him and drowns him. And from out of that, he creates his house. Apsu means abyss. The word abyss comes from Apsu. And so Ea is the lord of the watery abyss. And he creates his little dwelling there. And he ties up Mumu and dispenses with him. And then he starts having these premonitions about Tiamat coming to avenge these murders. So he goes and he talks to his father, Anu, and they say, well, maybe we should forestall this with an attack. He says, well, why don't you try it? So Anu goes out and tries to fight Tiamat and completely fails. She's too much for him. He comes back, and Ea says, well, I'll try. He goes out and tries to fight her, comes back, fails miserably. And they say, well, what are we going to do here? Because I think she's planning to destroy us. And Ea says, well, why don't we ask my son Marduk to take care of this for us? Meanwhile, it has been found out that Tiamat is creating a new race of monsters